What the union is fighting for is not only an improvement in their wages, but something that would benefit a broader working class population. Zero price increases focused solely on redistribution of profits towards wages. They lost, by the way, unfortunately, but they were out for 15 weeks with no strike benefits on behalf of this demand. Now, number one, what defeats social unionism? GM refuses price restraint, and in 1948 offers COLA. What's COLA?
Cost of living.
Okay, no one said Dr. Pepper. Cost of living adjustment, meaning that for GM members, any uptick in the cost of living would be matched by an uptick in their wages. By the way, a very positive thing for GM workers. But what does it represent for the rest of the population? Inflation. Inflation. It means now there's a decoupling of the outcome of bargaining for workers and the impact on the wider community, because this is exactly what happened. GM granted an 18% wage increase, not the 30%, and then immediately began raising prices. And it set off, this in a way, as a watershed. From here on, it's more and more difficult to argue that you are a vanguard of the working class, when increasingly you start to look like the aristocracy of labor. And I don't necessarily fault the people who were running the union at that time. They fought a very vigorous militant strike, and they lost. And that happens sometimes. You also see the other elements of what was going on here. They integrated the production trades, but they basically fell short of integrating the skilled trades, and supervision remained whites only. The failure of FM, not enough people had FM receivers. Eventually, the UAW donates WDET to Wayne State. These two are very important. Following 1945, the end of World War II, the economy is growing dramatically. And that meant the UAW's membership and the CIO unions in general, their membership was going up without doing any organizing. Because they're adding shifts, they're building more factories. So in a way they start to demobilize. They no longer have to go to the barricades. They're going to get growing membership because the economy is expanding in most years. And their base is also dispersing to the suburbs. Less and less contact with a coherent community established on a basis of a working class majority. And then 7 and 8, the Cold War, capitalism is now revived and capitalism is now celebrated again. Dissent is discouraged because, after all, it may suggest that you're not only a communist, but you're somehow allied with the Soviet Union, and they just got the atomic bomb, so you must be very dangerous. And that means that increasingly any kind of dissent is discouraged. And then finally, in 1948 and 49, 11 left-wing unions are purged from the CIO and expelled, and most of them are raided and driven into oblivion. I'll give you one example. The United Electrical Workers, very progressive left-wing union, had 700,000 members at its peak in the mid-1940s. Today, it's down to about 20,000. So we're looking at there's a lot of reasons that account for the defeat of social unionism, and I draw attention to this because I don't ever want to suggest that social unionism is an easy approach to maintain. It's very difficult to sustain a social unionism agenda. If it were easy, we'd still be doing it. Now, what does all this say about today? I want to start with this caveat. History doesn't repeat itself, but it sometimes rhymes. And I think there's a lot that rhymes, and there's also a lot that's different in terms of the circumstances today. And for us to effectively draw from those lessons of the past, we have to be wary about a simplistic application of those lessons to a present circumstance that is actually quite different. And one of those differences is suggested here. This is the old Dodge Main, long gone, now replaced by that GM Poletown plant. This meant that in 1936-37, when they sat down and occupied the plant. That's an interesting word, isn't it? It does suggest some parallel with today. It certainly rhymes. When they occupied this plant, the plants that they were seizing in 1937, 1936, were the most technologically advanced factories on the planet. Detroit was the Silicon Valley of heavy metal industrial manufacturing. That's no longer the case. And that's a profound difference. This is the old tool and die plant over near, in central Detroit, over near the old GM building. We've had capital flight on a massive scale, and much of the industrial capacity of this state, I don't think I need to belabor this, you know a lot about it firsthand. But there are some similarities. There are some things that do rhyme. This is a photo I just got a hold of, and it's a picture of Ford workers in 1941. Ford was the last of the big three to be organized. GM and Chrysler were organized during the sit-downs in 1937, but Ford took 4 more years because Ford basically relied on a battalion of basically gangsters to beat and repress union organization in the Ford plants. It took 4 more years, but they finally organized in 41. But this is in the Ford, this is during the Labor Day March in 1941, and they're saying their fearfulness of being fired is so profound that they're going to cover their faces during the Labor Day March. Same reason, same motivation. This is Honda workers in Mexico last year. They, by the way, are organizing against speed-up firings and a top-down oppressive management that includes a company union. They're trying to organize an independent democratic union. They, by the way, are being supported by the UAW. And this is a profound change in the UAW. 20 years ago, 25 years ago, it would have been a uniformly much more negative appraisal of Mexican workers and Japanese workers as the enemy. There's a growing recognition, it's not unanimous, but there's a growing understanding that these are actually our allies. And that this is part of our economy. It's no longer a U.S. auto industry, it's a North American and global auto industry. And we need to see, again, as a social unionism movement, we need to understand that that has to encompass workers on the other side of our national frontiers. This looks pretty similar. Kind of rhymes, doesn't it? This was what happened as unions organized and as the welfare state was established with a social safety net. There were other factors contributing to this, including the fact that much of our competition in Europe had been devastated by the war. But as you see around in the 1980s with Ronald Reagan, and more recently some of the other scoundrels who have misbehaved while in office, we have, again, a very similar enormous gap between rich and poor, with the same consequences in terms of the economy, the sputtering consumer demand that cannot sustain full employment, and a growing speculative urge that most recently led to the housing bubble. Then, 1938, registering for benefits. Now, 2009, Detroit, registering for a jobs fair. There are quite a few features of the current situation that rhyme, I think. Then, this is 1939 in Detroit. Now, this is over near my neighborhood. I live on the east side of Detroit. Detroit now has, by the way, they estimate 30,000 bank-owned homes. Roughly 90,000 properties that have been abandoned and are empty. How many of them are simply lots and how many have a structure is a matter of debate, but some people estimate there's as many as 65 to 70,000 empty homes in Detroit. And by the way, the same number is usually bandied about as the estimated number of foreclosures and evictions from 2005 to the present. Roughly 70,000 in the city of Detroit alone. Anybody recognize this? That's Grand Circus Park in 1932. It's an organization of the unemployed. This is the Unemployed Council's meeting. And I'm taking this they're looking basically northwest from the south end of Grand Circus Park. After I found this photo, I took my camera and took this same picture last fall. This is during the Occupy Detroit movement. And again, a sort of unexpected uprising, basically, and a questioning of the fundamentals of the system that has produced something I could not have imagined a year ago. I could imagine it, but I couldn't see it happening. There is now a questioning about social class and wealth and inequality that was unimaginable 12 months ago, and might be something we can continue to widen and develop in ways that could see a revival of sustained social organization and social unionism. Then, Unemployed Council. Now, this is one of my neighbors. This is Belva Davis. And back in 2009, we got some of the organizing that I'm still involved with now, People Before Banks. One of the first moments where we got organized around a foreclosure and potential eviction was to keep her in her house. She had been laid off, like thousands of others in Detroit, and the bank would not modify the mortgage. They're supposed to modify the mortgage, but they don't. Despite the fact that they've gotten billions in dollars, taxpayer dollars, in bailout monies, we don't get bailed out, they do. The only thing that changed her circumstance which by the way was one of frustration, month after month, denial of the modification, the progression of that inexorable eviction process. She was looking at the prospect of ending up on the street until we started doing this. We started picketing the bank. It was Wells Fargo. This is the Wachovia subsidiary that they bought recently. We had about 70 pickets out there. That's not supposed to happen. We put yellow crime tape, police crime tape across the door saying corporate crime scene. That afternoon, the bank called her, and she got a modification. And we've been trying to reproduce these kinds of circumstances in the cases where we can find families that are facing foreclosure and eviction, but are willing to fight. The sad fact of the matter is that that's hard to find, because most people, as they are confronting foreclosure and eviction, their primary response is shame and embarrassment. We're trying to turn that into anger. What is, after all, this double standard? Banks trash the economy, engage in massive fraud, predatory lending, forgery, and what do they get? Billions in bailouts and bonuses for their executives. Belva and others like her did nothing except lose their jobs. And what do they get? Thrown out in the street. We're hoping to galvanize the anger of that, and we've been doing so as effectively as we can. And UAW Local 600 and other UAW locals are starting to recognize that if they want to build community support for a broadened labor movement, you do that by engaging in the kinds of issues that are important and imperative for the community. So this was a rally we had last year on behalf of raising money.